Toss aside the touchy-feely notions of love in business and recognize the real power it holds. Welcome to the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast with host Steve Farber. Drawing on his work with a wide variety of companies from the Fortune 100 to smaller family-owned businesses, Farber shares inspiring interviews with business leaders and proven strategies for how you can create experiences that your customers will love by developing a culture that your employees, teammates, and colleagues love working in. Discover why and how love, at the end of the day, is just damn good business for you too. Here's your host, Steve Farber.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Love is Just Damn Good Business podcast. I'm your host, Steve Farber. You can listen to this podcast. You can read this podcast, the transcript of it, that is. You can watch this podcast. You can subscribe to it as well at stevefarber.com/podcast. I know it's not a particularly creative URL, but it should be pretty easy to remember. My guest today is my dear friend, Frank DeAngelis. Frank DeAngelis he's retired now, but he was the principal of Columbine High School. Yes, that Columbine High School. And yes, Frank was the principal during that particular time that has taken a place in history here in the U.S. He started out at Columbine as a staff member. He was a social studies teacher. He was the head baseball coach. He was the assistant football coach. He was the dean of students. He was the assistant principal, and then finally became the principal of Columbine in 1996 and retired in 2014 after 35 years at Columbine. And the choice that Frank made as to when he retired and why he decided to retire at that time is one of the things that I'm going to ask him to share with us here in a few minutes. Nowadays, in addition to spending his time serving on lots of different boards, speaking at events, both virtually and in person around the country, acting as a consultant to the Jeffco School District, where he spent so many years. He is also, in these days of virtual classrooms, putting in some good time as a grandpa, helping with his granddaughter's at-home studies, many of which apparently are in Chinese. So that's a whole other story. His wonderful book is called They Call Me Mr. D, as in DeAngelis. So Mr. D, Frank, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, Steve, it's great to be here. And we were just kind of reminiscing. I think the last time we were in person, boy, times were good. It was, I'll always remember it, leap year, and remember there on 27th, 28th, and then 29th, and then flew back, and boy, has our lives changed since that.
Yeah. So Frank, you spoke at our Extreme Leadership Experience, which was, we're having this conversation in December of 2020. And that was, it was a leap year. It was over leap weekend. And as many listeners of this podcast know, that LEAP is our methodology for extreme leadership: love, energy, audacity, and proof. So we had that event over the LEAP weekend, February 27, 28, and 29. And you, of course, were one of our speakers. And wow, you really had an impact on folks. And that's the second time that I've had you as a guest speaker at one of our events. And it's really been wonderful, not only seeing the impact that you have on people through your story, but also through your authentic heart and the way you show up. And it's been a real honor getting to know you over these now, becoming many years, really, that since we first met. And yeah, we managed to squeak that one in right under the pandemic, and things have changed a lot since then. But so I'd like to find out what you're doing nowadays. But let's start with kind of take us back to the earlier days for you at Columbine, leading up to to that rather infamous now experience that you went through. So take us back to, not to, I remember the day that I was born. Not that far back, but take us to the early days of your story.
Most definitely, and it's real interesting. And I share this all the time. I'll give away my age, but I graduated from high school in 1972 and grew up in a blue collar family. And I'm so fortunate. My parents are still alive today. My dad's 90 and my mom's 86, but they instilled so many good values in me, and being Italian, it's easy to wear my emotions on my sleeve. And I learned so many things from them early on. And so, they worked 2 or 3 jobs to make sure my brother and sister and I all had a good life and things of that nature. But, when I got to high school, I decided I was going to go to college, and I was going to be the first person to go to college, and thought I wanted to be an accountant. And boy, my parents were happy. Had a family friend whose dad was a CPA, and he said, boy, you get your degree, pass the test, you're going to be a CPA. And I said, yeah. And everybody proud of Frankie. Well, I went to college, and first year I was in these classes and I was taking general study, but I was in some accounting class. And something you'll hear me talk about throughout today is passion. It's about having that passion and love. And boy, it just wasn't there. And I said, well, I'm going to give it another chance. I'm going to go back my sophomore year. And all of a sudden I signed up for 18 hours. By the end of first semester, I dropped 9 hours. I was spending more time at the coffee shop than I was in the classes. So go back for second semester my sophomore year, and professor says, okay, now students, it was a cost accounting class. He said, now students, what you're going to do is you need to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. And I said, no, we don't. I'm out of here. And so I go home, and I was working at a grocery store part-time, and I got promoted to frozen food manager. And my parents were disappointed because I dropped out of school, but I was doing all right. Now, mind you, this was 1972. I was making almost $6 an hour, living at home, pretty good life, having a good time. But I kept thinking, is this what I wanted to do with the rest of my life? And, I'm full-blooded Italian. And if you saw me in person, you'd be able to detect that right away by my dark hair and shortness and things. And well, you see me with my hands. So, I'm Italian. But anyway, I had an uncle, and Uncle Vito, and he said, Frankie, he told me, he said, choose a job you love. You never have to work a day in your life. Love what you do and do what you love. And I can think back to a teacher that I had, and I had so much respect for him. He was my psychology teacher, and he was my baseball coach, Mr. Dittman. And I still can't call him by his first name. It's either going to be Coach or Mr. Dittman, because I have that much respect. And it's almost 50 years since we were together. And I decided to be an educator. And I can remember coming home, and I'm excited. Mom, guess what? Dad, I'm going to go back to school. Oh, really? We're so excited. I'm going to be a teacher. And you could just see them kind of turn pale. And they said, why do you want to live in a state of poverty for the rest of your life?
They're saying, wait a minute, you want to make a move from frozen food manager to teacher? What a step down.
And so
is that really their attitude?
And it was, and they weren't too far off, because I think my first contract at Columbine High School was like $10,000 for the entire year. I had to get them to co-sign for me to purchase a home. But you know what I tell people, and I truly believe this, it's all about relationships. And what I tell people, even now when I mentor young people, I said, you're never going to be rich being an educator, but something you can't put a price tag on is when a kid comes up to you and still calls you Coach D or Mr. D. Every year I get invited to 8 or 9 weddings, or I get invited to a college graduation. And, as I tell people, you can't put a price tag on that. As a result of that, I'm one of the richest people on the face of the earth. And I would go back and do it again, even with experienced one of the worst days of my life. It was the best thing. And people ask me now that I'm retired, they said, what do you miss? I don't miss all the testing. I don't miss all the, the bureaucracy stuff that's going on, but boy, do I miss the kids. And so, I made a good choice.
Yeah. You miss the kids, and yet a lot of those kids, what I'm hearing is you miss the experience of working with those kids every day. A lot of the specific kids that you shepherded through all those many years, certainly they're no longer kids.
Yeah.
But you're still a part of their lives because they keep drawing you in. because of the impact that you had on them. What an incredible legacy that is. But when you started at Columbine, you were did you have designs on being a principal, or what was your motivation? I mean, what was it that really brought you into the school every day before your principalship?
Well, it was interesting because I loved what I was doing. I loved teaching history, mainly American history. As you stated, as football, baseball coach. And I can remember my mentor, Ron Mitchell, came up to me one day and he said, "Have you ever thought of being an administrator?" And I said, "Why would I want to be one of them?" And he said, "Well, Frank, I think you have some leadership qualities, but I also realized if I made that choice to be an administrator, I would have to give up my coaching, and I would have to give up some of those daily interactions I had, because I was afraid anytime you move up, whether it's in business, if you're a police officer and all of a sudden you leave the streets to go be a captain or things like that, you lose those daily interactions." And I was worried about that. And a dear friend of mine, Susan Peters, she was an English teacher, and we co-taught. We did a class called American Studies, and she did the American literature piece of it, and I did the American history piece of it. And she said, "Frank, I'm going to give you some advice." She said, "Your position is changing, but you don't have to change as a person." And she said, "Do you realize the impact that you can have right now? You have 150 students that you work with throughout the week, and you coach in football, you have, 50, 60 kids baseball. But now if you decide to be the principal, you're going to have an opportunity to work with 2,000 kids on a daily basis. You're going to have an opportunity to work with 150 staff members and realize the impact. And if it's important for you to still be involved in those kids' lives, I know you're a smart person. You'll find a way to do that." And that's one of the things that I made a vow. And every day I would block out time. And I mean, you were at our school. I blocked out time to be with the kids and be in those classrooms. And whenever I was having a bad day and, there were parents that might have been upset with some things that were going on, I would find a way and I'd walk out of that classroom or walk out of my office into a classroom. It made all the difference in the world. And it was the right thing to do. But, it was real interesting. Probably one of the best compliments I received when I retired is when the staff came up to me and they said, "Mr. D, you never became one of them. You were always one of us." And even though I was in administration for well over 20 years, I never forgot what it was like to be that administrator or be that teacher. And I would love when I would go back into the classroom and teach classes and have just fun with the kids. And I think that's what really helped my career.
Well, I think what you demonstrated is the reality that being an administrator doesn't automatically equate with being a leader, right? Because an administrator is a position of authority. The leadership part of it is more about the connection and with your whole constituency, which includes your teachers, right? And in other words, you never became one of quote unquote them. That shows the connection with that aspect of your constituency, to use that word, and also the kids. And you maintained and deepened your connection with them, just simply because you loved them and you spent time with them. You actually put it on your calendar. Not every administrator will do that. Not every person, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the educator here, obviously. But from what I've seen, not everybody that takes that position of principal or superintendent, for that matter, does it with maintaining that connection in mind. Many times people will use that as kind of an escape from the very thing that they're supposed to be making a difference in.
Right. And one of the things that used to break my heart is I had teachers, I had fellow administrators, they were actually counting the days until they retired. And I had teachers actually have calendars saying, I only have 13 more Mondays, or I only have 5 more faculty meetings where I have to listen to you. And what bothered me is it was affecting the kids, and I truly believe that if I walked into any school, in California, in San Diego, in Colorado, within 5 minutes, I can tell which teachers love what they're doing. If I walked in any building, I could tell which principals loved what they were doing. It's about the relationships. And what breaks my heart.
How could you tell?
It's just, those teachers, when you have teachers that are struggling to connect with kids, they're the ones saying, we need tougher laws, or we need attendance policies, we need tardy policies, and we need this. Well, when you walk into classrooms in which the kids love to be in those classes, those kids show up on time, they don't want to leave. And it's just those interactions, how they deal with it. And I mean, there are literally times I walked in classrooms and within 5 minutes, I can see why these kids are bored. I mean, it's how, and you try to help these teachers. And, you know, one of the things, I think there's so many people that feel that anyone can teach because they went to school. And there's so many, I mean, we think of all the negative things to come out of this pandemic, but there are some positive things to come out. And I truly believe that because of parents having to be involved in remote education and things, I think there's a whole new appreciation for teachers, you know, because they're dealing with 1 or 2 kids. Well, can you imagine having 30 of those little kids running around, or, you know, 15 or 20 high school kids that are copping an attitude with you? And so I think it's important. And to me, I use this statement, and I did not make it up. And I used to tell my staff all the time, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is so important. And I've seen people that, we had someone who actually worked on projects for NASA and he decided he was going to be a teacher. Anybody can teach, right? And so comes in, he's got his doctorate and mechanical engineering and things. And all of a sudden, I mean, he was so bright, but I put him in front of 15 or 20 ninth graders, and he could not connect because he was smart as can be, but he could not relate to the kids. Right. And it's that relationship piece. And Steve, one of the things I state all the time, if I'm interviewing 2 people, I would never hire someone incompetent. But if someone came in and all he or she did was I, and I have this award, I have this degree, and someone else comes in and may not have the education that person has, but that person talks about the kids, talks about working with others, I'm going to hire someone with the least amount of education, because I could send him or her to get that education. I can't give someone a personality.
Yeah.
And so right. I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah. So you built your career on the basis of those relationships. And, you know, knowing you the way that I do, and having had the great opportunity to actually see you in action, you know, for a day when I visited Columbine when you were still in your principalship, I know that connection is deep and it's real and it's reciprocated. I mean, it's not just your love for the kids; they loved you right back, and all of that played a role in what happened on and after that fateful day that we've all heard about, at least to some degree or another, the tragedy at Columbine. So can you share with us the story of that day? And then I'd also like to delve into the kind of the aftermath of that and where that has led folks since.
Right. And one of the things I want to touch upon when we talk a little bit about this is, because people ask me this question all the time, is what kind of leader was I prior to the event? Right. And then after, and I want to share that because it's important. But on that day, April 20th, it was a beautiful Colorado spring day, about 70 degrees, blue skies. And one of the things that I tried to be in the building as much as I could. And I was not a big proponent of going to meetings and things of that nature. But on that day, I started out off campus, and I was actually at a breakfast for some of our kids. They were future business leaders of America. And so they were being recognized by the Chamber of Commerce. And so I was late getting to school that day. And the reason that's important is, out of 175 days, I was probably down in the cafeteria 170 days. I was one of the few high school, I loved cafeteria duty. You know, most people give it to their assistant principals, or I loved it because I got to walk around at the table, talk to the kids. You know, I can remember I was the type of principal literally pushing a broom, and they're saying, "You're the principal. Why would you do that?" Because I said, it's important we have a clean school. And what I learned in leadership is I could be that person. Hey, throw the trash in there, you know, pick up this. And all of a sudden they do it begrudgingly, but all of a sudden, if you're doing it And they say, oh my gosh. They said, why would you do this? You're the principal. You should. And I said, it's important for all of us to do this. And all of a sudden you see kids picking up, it's how you deliver the message. And so I loved it. Well, on this day, I wasn't down in the cafeteria. And one of my all-time favorite teachers, his name is Kiki Leba, and he student taught at Columbine. He was on a 1-year contract. And I had just interviewed him the day before to offer him a full-time job. Well, I couldn't find him, and he was late getting to my office, and I was going to give him, welcome to the Columbine family. You're welcome. You're a rebel now. And to this day, we talk. I don't know if I ever offered him a contract. Now, he's still working at Columbine 21 years later, but the reason is as soon as we sat down, my secretary comes running in, Susan White, and the door was shut, and there was a little window on the door, and she literally face planted, and I knew that something was wrong, and opened the door, and she said, Frank, there'd been a report of gunfire in the school. And in my mind, I'm saying this can't be happening. I've been at Columbine 21 years. You could count on two hands the number of fist fights. And so, I had this sinking feeling. She said, what should I do? I said, call 911. So all of a sudden, I come out of my office, and I went through something I didn't know back then, but something I learned later through people I worked with was fight, flight, and freeze. And I thought I walked down very slowly to the thing. In actuality, I sprinted down the hallway. And in my mind, everything just seemed to slow down. And all I can remember thinking, and it's so weird, 21 years later, these thoughts, what it was going to feel like to have a bullet pierce my body, because I had never been in a situation like that. And so as I come out of my office, shots are being fired, glass is breaking behind me. And as I thought, I walked fairly slowly. Kiki Leba and my secretary said I sprinted right towards a gunman. And I don't remember any of that. Even when I went into counseling later, I tried to relive that, and I just couldn't. And police officers said, Frank, you're unarmed. Why would you sprint towards a gunman? And I said, one reason only. Some of my kids were in trouble. I had about 20, 25 girls that were coming out of a locker room to go to a physical education class, and they were unaware of what was happening. And so they were right in the crossfire. So I run down the hallway, and all of a sudden they're saying, Mr. D, Papa D, what's going on? I said, we got to go. And I knew if I got him into the gymnasium, then there were some doors that would allow me to get him outside to a safe place. Well, everything was going as planned. And so all of a sudden we go down this hallway, and we literally hear the boots of the gunman coming towards us, sounds, and the shots being fired, and the girls are in a state of panic. Everything's going as planned until I pull on this door, and it's locked. And I mean, we're trapped, and girls are screaming. Literally, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And things happened that day that I can't explain, that I'm thankful for. I reached in my pocket, and I was the old time principal. I wore a suit every day or a sport coat. I reached in my pocket, and I had about 30 keys on a key ring, and the keys weren't specially marked. I reached in my pocket, and the first key I pulled out, I stuck in the door, and it opened it on the first try. And I truly, truly believe that if I would have done that, there's a good chance, Steve, you and I would not be doing this podcast. And it was really interesting a couple of years ago, very emotional time. It was a 20-year remembrance back in 2019. And some of those girls that were with me, I invited them all back. And they came up, and all of a sudden they see me, and they're crying and I'm crying. And they said, Mr. D, I want to introduce you to my son and daughter, and this is my husband. And we just want to thank you for finding that key, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be with me today. And all I did is I said, I had very little to do in finding that key. And I'm just so glad we're all here together. And so it was at that point, I got outside, and I got the girls outside, and it was really interesting, a little bit of humor. I said, I'm going to lock you in this area because I got to go outside to make sure it's safe to get you out there. So I knew they were safe, and it was in a storage area. And all of a sudden, in this, imagine out, little teenage girls, and they said, Mr. D, how do we know it's you? And I said, well, we need a password. And so all of a sudden, for about 10 minutes, they're being high school girls. Well, let's do this, and this. And I said, come up with the password. And they said, orange peels. And we kind of laughed, and it lightened the moment. But needless to say, we didn't need a password because I had a key to get back in there anyway, but it was like it eased the moment. So I got them back outside. And
Frank, I just want to say, just interject one thing, if I may.
sure.
Um, yes, you can't take responsibility or credit, I think is the right word, for finding that key. But what you did have through all that was the very clear presence of mind to act in every way in the heat of all of that on behalf of the safety of those girls. The presence of mind to have those keys, to remember to reach for those keys, to go to that door, that you did have. And then you got that, let's call it the assist of not having to search for that key.
Yeah. And and it's real interesting. They interviewed some of the girls and they said, were you ever scared? And they said, no, Papa was with us. And I mean, talk about heartwarming. And that's the relationship, you want to build. And I'll tell you, Steve, there's so many things that resonate in my mind, right, of that horrific day. But part of the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing now, as far as, helping others, end up going down to Leawood Elementary, and that was a reunification site. And I want people to think back to over 20 plus years ago. The only drills we did were fire drills. We never did some of the drills that we have kids doing now, these lockdown situations or run, hide, and fight. We did the very best we could. But one of the things we did is we didn't know anything about reunification. So we went down to an elementary school, and buses were transporting the kids from Columbine down to the elementary school.
Can you just quickly explain what reunification means?
Reunification, basically what reunification means is that parents were informed that they needed to come and get their kids. And so we would have an administrator down there, the parents would come up, show ID, and they would be reunited with their kids. Well, needless to say, it was very emotional, a lot of tears, a lot of hugging, because back then the cell phone service was not good. A lot of these parents, when they heard, you could imagine if you're working or whatever you're doing and saying there's been gunshots fired at your son or daughter's school, your heart would just start racing. And so as time went on that during that evening, I had so many parents come up to me because I had been there for 20 years, and they said, Frank, did you see my son or my daughter? They were in a math class or science class, and I had not. And then one of the things that haunts me to this day is I had a father come up and say, Frank, for the past 5 or 6 hours, there's been yellow school buses driving up and dropping kids off. We haven't seen a bus in about the last 30 minutes. And that's when a grief counselor came over to me. Something with all the education I received, I was never prepared for this. And he came up and he said, Frank, you need to take these family members and we're going to take them into a room, and you need to tell them there's a good chance their loved ones lost their lives in your school. And I can remember walking in there, and at times in our life, finding the right words, you just can't. I mean, those kids, Mr. Sanders, they walked in the school at 7 o'clock in the morning, they never returned home. And that's something, the survivor's guilt. I mean, those parents entrusted me to take care of those kids, and I felt I let them down. And it was very difficult. And I can remember, and this is where my parents raised me with the motto of sometimes you have to stand up for what is right, even though you're standing alone. And I remember being in that school that night. And of course, there were media people there. There were attorneys there representing districts, and they said, Frank, before you talk to those parents, you better be careful because of potential lawsuits. And I said, the last thing on my mind right now is lawsuits. These parents had just lost their kids. And I can remember I was being advised, you got to say this, you got to do this. And being full-blooded Italian, I'm very stubborn. And at times I got to do what's right. And the first case where that came up, it was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I went to the homes of each of those parents who lost a child and Mrs. Sanders. And I went to those houses. And I didn't know what to say. And we just held each other and we cried. And when the district leadership found out, some of the attorneys, they were upset. And they said, Frank, if you do that again, you're on your own, pal, because you cannot continue to go down there. Well, I didn't listen because a few weeks later, I went back to those houses. But this time I had both bouquets of flowers because it was Mother's Day. And I brought flowers for the moms. And boy, it was tough. But what I did back then, shaped the relationships that I have with those parents today. And I can remember that night I couldn't go back to my house because the FBI was concerned about the safety and welfare of my family. And I ended up going to my brother's house, and needless to say, I couldn't sleep. And I made a promise that night. There was nothing I could do to bring them back, but I was going to make sure they didn't die in vain, and I was going to continue to speak on their behalf. And that's what I'm doing now.
So I want to pick up on that thought in just a minute. But first, take us back to that. What happened after that moment when you decided that the password was orange peels? And then take us forward from that moment again.
So yes, so all of a sudden I shut the door, and they're laughing, and I said, "Orange peels." They said, "Orange peels." I said, "I promise you, I will be back." And so I go out of the little area where I put them, and I open the door, and that's when I realized the severity of what was happening. Because all of a sudden I stuck my head out the door because there was a report coming in. A sniper is being outside and having the building surrounded. There was actually someone that was working on the air conditioning for the building that was up on top, and they thought he was a sniper. And so he was confronted by the police. And all of a sudden I get outside, and I told a police officer, I said, "I have my kids. They're in the school. I need to go get them." They said, "We're going to cover you. You go get them and bring them back out." And that's exactly what happened. And I got them outside, and I was getting ready. I said, "There's more of my kids in there. They need me." And they said, "You're not going back in that building." And one of the most disheartening things, and there have been so many lessons learned since that horrific day. You know, we had a school resource officer that was actually exchanging gunfire, but he was told, now this was not the police officer's fault, but the protocol at the time was, let's secure the perimeter, and then we have to wait for the SWAT team to arrive. Well, they did that. And probably one of the most frustrating things for the 300 plus people that were stacked in the building, they're looking out like you would look out your window. I'm looking out my window, and you see all these law enforcement agencies out there. You see all these paramedics. No one's coming in the building. And they had to wait for SWAT. And unfortunately, it took SWAT about 58 minutes to get there before an officer entered. And by the time they entered, the two killers had taken their own life. But now you look at the protocol, and people said, "Frank, are there lessons learned?" There really are. We're doing things. And I truly, truly believe that schools are the safest place. They really are. And so there were a lot of lessons learned, but, you know, we lost those 13, and we opened up this podcast. You know, this past year, I met with Mr. Scott. Rachel was our first young lady that was killed. And Mr. Scott said, "Frank, you realize Rachel's been dead longer than she was alive." And so these kids right now would be 38 and 39 years old if they had survived. So, but, you know, one of the things that I learned early on is if I was going to continue to be principal at Columbine, and I learned this through counseling, he said, you can't relive that day. I mean, I know it was horrific, but if you're going to continue to be that principal, I mean, you really need to celebrate their lives. And that's what I tried to do in moving forward, is even though they died at, you know, the ages of 15 through 18, I just have those fond memories of the time I got to spend with them and how lucky of a person I was.
And you made a commitment to the community around that time as well. Did you go? Am I getting this right? Did you go and visit with some of the younger kids, like the elementary school kids, after the tragedy?
Yeah, I did, and I made a promise. Even though they were not there, they were impacted by it, because over at Columbine High School, there's a park over there right now where the memorials was built. And these little kids remember what it was like in the community. Streets were closed off. They had makeshift memorials. They had the truck of John Tomlin in which they decorated with flowers. And I told them, this is a great community. And I said, I'll make a promise. If you come to Columbine, and these are first graders, second graders, I said, if you come to Columbine, I will be there to give you your diploma. And I said, Rebels for Life. And we were Columbine. Well, it was interesting, and I had made that promise. So I'm getting ready to retire in 2012. I had fulfilled my promise and getting ready. And all of a sudden, word got out I was going to retire. And a parent calls up and said, Frank, you can't retire. And I said, no, I made that promise. They said, no, you don't understand. My kid was in the first year of a 2-year preschool program. So you need to stay for a couple more years. So I stayed to 2014, but it was the right thing to do. And people tell me that Columbine, I needed Columbine because when I left, the kids that came in, which was the class of 2017, they were actually not even born yet when it happened. So I felt I fulfilled that promise and helped to
No,
rebuild.
you said earlier that there are it always bothered you when you knew educators that were literally counting the days till they retired. And of course, they were counting those days for a very different reason. They were counting those days until I can get the hell out of here. Well, you had a countdown as well, counting the days until you retire to fulfill that obligation to those kids, that you'll be there when they grow up, when they go to high school, and when they graduate. I can't imagine what your graduation celebration must have been like.
It was unreal. Unbeknownst to me, it was there, and President Obama, my boss read a letter from President Obama and the kids, and I ended up, I said, even though I'm old, I'm going to do something. I took a selfie, and that selfie, all of a sudden, it went out on Instagram. It got a lot of hits, but it was so important. And those kids, it was that last class. It was phenomenal what we went through. And the thing that was amazing to me, one of the things that I'm really proud of is there are about 30 staff members at Columbine, teachers that were students of mine. I either taught them, coached them, or as their principal. And boy, they come back and they give, and it really is. And I tell people now, Columbine is probably stronger today than what it was prior, because we had to come together. And you think, and that's what I'm hoping for now during this pandemic, that we come together and together to help each other. And that empathy piece, I cannot overemphasize the importance of that.
Didn't you go flying into that on a zip line or something? What was that?
I did. Well, it was interesting. I wasn't your typical principal. And there were people saying, yeah, you could pull that stuff off at elementary school, maybe middle school, but at high school, you can't pull. Well, just to give you an idea, I mean, one year I came in as Willy Wonka. Another year I came in as a mermaid. Probably one of the dumbest things I ever did, and I'm lucky to live to tell about. I came in as Rocky Balboa. So I come in and I'm running up the bleachers and the whole thing, and then all of a sudden I have to give my speech while I'm having a hard time speaking. And so meanwhile, I said, I want the toughest kid in this school to come down. And so we had this planned, and I come in with my hands on one of the kids, and he's my manager. So we had it planned. Well, the kid that was going to come down was a heavyweight champion at Columbine, and he outweighed me by 150 pounds. And he said, Mr. D, you think we could I said, no, we got it. So all of a sudden he comes down, and he was relentless. So I go to tackle him. He's literally dragging me around the mat. And then he picks me up and he starts spinning me up above. And the kids are just chanting my name. And I said, Travis, if you don't set me down, you'll never graduate from high school. So he threw me on the mat, and I said, and I'm going to knee you in the stomach. You're going to roll on your back, and I'm going to pin you, and I'm going to come up. You understand? He said, yes, sir. And we did that. And so I did crazy things. And I came in one year, Sinatra singing New York, New York. Well, I realized, I said, I want my last assembly to be memorable. So I'm scared to death of heights. And so I decided I was going to fly in, and I got the idea. We did the play Peter Pan, and they were able to bring a kid across this small little area. And so I said, I'm going to find a way to do it. And so I went to this place where they did zip lining. And my assistant principal said, Frank, if you're afraid of height, and all of a sudden you get up there and you're flying and you kind of get sick, they're going to remember you for all the wrong reasons. And they said, maybe you need to practice this. So we go, and all of a sudden they're pulling me up by 5 feet, and I'm handling it. And then all of a sudden they said, we're going to put something on you. So they put me up about 20 feet, and they put this little belt around me, and I'm spinning around. And I said, I don't want to be an astronaut. Just get me from point A to point B. So they figured it out. And lo and behold, it's time for a presentation, and my parents were there, and they had no idea, because if they knew I was doing that, they were these overprotective Italian parents, even when I'm 60. And so all of a sudden it's real dark, and I'm going up on this large crane, and all of a sudden I put on the song My Way by Sinatra, hit it, that crane goes, and I go flying, and my wife's there, and my mom and dad, oh my God, that's Frankie. And I'm going across, and then the kids start cheering and cheering and cheering. But one of the most memorable things of that day is talking about love, 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 is the fact that we had a kid, his name was Kevin Yagabani. And one of the things that I did as a principal, and I don't know, I have a pretty good memory, but I knew most of the kids by their first name, and last name, a lot of them. And I would see him in the hallway, boy. And this one kid came to Columbine, but he was not part of the elementary and middle school. So he came one day to our school, and I met with him. And within 5 minutes, Steve, I'm crying. And he's telling me his life story that, his parents, every time he said, I love someone, they get rid of me. And his parents passed him on to his grandparents, who passed him on to foster homes. And he said, Mr. D, you're my 9th principal. And he said, I've never been able to trust anyone. He said, but there's something different with you. You called me in here, you know my name. I think you care about me. And he said, Mr. D, and I used to give every kid a chain link, and they would be connected at Columbine. And he said, I never got this little link, but I'll always be connected to Columbine. Well, all of a sudden, it's my last assembly. I knew what I was going to do, but I wasn't sure what I was going to say. And this Kevin Yagabani put something in my mailbox wishing me goodbye. And he talks about the climate at Columbine High School. And he said, I didn't understand what love was until I was a part of this school. So all of a sudden I go flying across, and I come down, and I bring Kevin Yagabani down, and I give him this link. And all of a sudden, the entire student body and parents are standing up cheering this kid for the first time. Here's a kid who tried to harm himself several times because he didn't feel wanted. And he's standing up, fist pumping. And all of a sudden, I see kids crying and teachers crying. And I said, this is what I want to do, this inclusive environment, and love does win out. And it was so important. And it was that day, and in my very last day of school, one of the things that I'll always remember is, and I tell people this in education, is you need to, bring your very best, because you don't know when you're going to impact a kid's life. And there's this kid, big, large kid, and every day he would come by and he'd give me a big bear hug. Hey, Mr. D, how you doing? You have a great day. And I'd say, yes, young man, you have a great day. Call him. And so the last day, I'm getting ready to leave. He comes up to me and he gives me a bear hug. Shakes my hand. He said, thanks for being more of a father to me than my dad ever was. And it's those types of things that can make a difference. And those are the things I miss. And I think, I really believe, and we all believe this, you want to leave it better than the way you found it. And I hope I did that.
Yeah. So your whole approach to leading was to create that inclusive environment. Yeah. And one of the things that you learned from the tragedy is that maybe the place wasn't as inclusive as you thought it was, right? Yeah. And that kind of recommitted you to that. So since your zipline assembly and your official retirement back in 2014, and I'm sure this was true before you retired as well. We've had so many school tragedies. It seems like there's so many. And oftentimes, I will see you on one of the, the cable news networks afterwards, commenting on what had just happened. Do people reach out to you a lot in those scenarios?
Yeah. I made a comment, Steve, within the week it happened. I said, I just joined a club in which no one wants to be a member. And I truly believe what happens is whenever my phone, I start getting texts such as, you're in my thoughts and prayers, thinking about you. If you need anything, let me know. And then within 5 minutes, the media starts calling. I know it's another shooting. And so they do reach out. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is you relive a lot of things. And even though I can remember where I was when Parkland happened, I remember where I was when Sandy Hook happened. And even though it's in Connecticut or it's in Florida, or there was a shooting in California at Sagas High School, even though it's different places, 15, 20 years later, it takes you back to that day. And it does. And even though I see the kids running, even though those kids were running out of the high school at Parkland, they remind me of the kids running out of Columbine. But the one thing is I have a great support system in place. And and that's the thing I think that's so important. And even what we're going through right now is just finding that support system. And, I received great advice from a Vietnam veteran. My mom worked for him. His name was John Fisher, and my mom worked for him. And he called me within 24 hours of the shooting after Columbine. And he said, Frank, I got back from Vietnam. I never got the help I needed. And, I flashbacks and things, and I didn't think I needed help. He said, well, I'm paying for it. And he said, don't do that to yourself. He said, you're going to be called to help so many other people. You're going to be pulled in so many other directions. And if you don't help yourself, you can't help others. And, I use this analogy all the time that, when you get an opportunity to get on a plane again, and that flight attendant comes on and says, he or she comes on and says, if this cabin loses pressure, there's going to be a oxygen mask that drops down. Before you help that child next to you, before you help that person next to you that may need help, you need to put that mask on yourself. And I think that's so important in dealing, and it helped me get to where I needed to be.
So when we, the general we, when we look around and see, all of the shootings at all these various schools and in other public scenarios, it's very easy for fear to take over. And it's very easy for a lot of us to get cynical, that life is dangerous and this is what society has come to. So that it's revealing, a lot of certainly some very deep challenges that we have as a society. What advice would you give us? What is your perspective on it? And how do we move forward together in the face of, or maybe even because of, these various tragedies?
Steve, one of the things I think is important is we do hear of the shootings that continue to happen, but what we don't hear about is how many have been stopped because of things we're doing differently now. That I truly believe that if some of the protocols, some of the things we have in place were in place back then, that we could have prevented a Columbine. But one of the things that I tell people, they always ask me, what are you going to do? And I said, what are we going to do? They're all of our kids. And that's where we need to come together, because schools are safe, but what we need to do, and I think one of the things that I will always wonder is if the two that did what they did at Columbine, or the person who did what they did at Parkland or throughout, Sandy Hook, did they share that information with anyone? And did people take it seriously? And I think the thing that we have to realize, and many times in our minds, we feel that these incidents happen at certain places. And I got to tell you, Steve, if you would have told me that a Columbine could happen at Columbine, I would have said no. And one of the responses I get so many times when I go out and present and talk about the Columbine community, they'll come up to me and say, Frank, I can't believe it. This is the community in which I live, or in which my kids go to school, or I went to school. And I guess on any given day it could happen, but we can't give up hope. And it takes parents, and it takes kids. And one of my biggest fears right now is the role that social media is playing in our lives, in our lives, but even more so in our kids' lives. And if these potential shooters are out there, or these people that want to harm themselves or others are out there, and people know about it, we need to take care and report it, because we owe that to each other. And I think that's the most important thing.
And your example is so inspiring, and thank you for sharing that story. It is in these hyper politicized days, there's a tendency, I think, for a lot of people to make a political issue out of these things, and really it's more of, like you said, it's a community issue and a relationship issue. It's not the sole responsibility of teachers to cultivate our kids' success. It's teachers and parents and the business people in the community. I'm involved in a group called the Community Alliance for Youth Success, which was started by Stedman Graham and Bobby DePorter. And the whole premise behind that is it's all of our responsibility, all of ours, in every community, to raise our kids up, give them the right kind of education and the right kind of support and the right kind of encouragement and the right kind of opportunities. And if we can all do that, then the response to tragedy is always going to be important, but the consistency with which it happens should lessen, right?
I agree.
So as you look back over your career so far and you look forward to expanding on this next chapter for you, which is involving a lot of speaking and writing and helping others, are there a couple of, I don't want to simplify this into, okay, so give us the top three the important things, because life is more nuanced than that. But having said that, are there a couple, two or three principles that have really emerged for you as being important leadership elements for all of us?
I think something that's so important is, and I told you this earlier, it's all about the passion for what you do, but it's all about love. And that's why we connected so well. It's love, love, love. And one of the things that I worry about so many times, and I tell people this, there's no guarantees in life. And, I look at people that wait until an event happens to tell them how they feel. And that was never me. And I told you I wanted to share this. It was the Friday before the tragedy happened. And so it was a prom assembly. And I think as parents, as educators, community members, you always worry about, your kids during certain times, whether it be prom weekend, homecoming weekend, graduation, and you hope they make wise choices. And we were high school kids one time, and there's some choices we probably were not the wisest choice. But I got my kids in front of, there were 2,000 kids at Columbine, and this was about April 17th, 1999, and I had them close their eyes. And the prom assembly was one more serious. I dressed normally and I talked to the kids and I said, I want you to close your eyes. And I said, you are a valued member of this Columbine family. And I said, each and every one of you brings so much. And even though we have 2,000 people, we're all together, we're all family. And I said, I envision being at your graduation class of 99 in about a month. And I'm looking forward to all of your 10-year reunions. And I'm looking forward to being at your weddings if you decide, and just following your careers once you leave here, because just because you're leaving doesn't mean I'm going to stop caring about you. And I said, I want you now to open your eyes and imagine what it would be like on Monday morning if that person that's sitting next to you is not here because of a choice they made. And I'm asking you, as your principal, don't ever deny me those opportunities to watch you grow as my kids. And I said, I want to see each and every one of your smiling faces on Monday morning. And I love each and every one of you. And there's yelling out, we love you, Mr. D. So go to prom. Monday, kids come by my office. Here's my smiling face, Mr. D. Well, 24 hours later, the tragedy happens. And I can remember then on the following day, April 21st, I had to meet with the kids. I had to meet with the staff and political leaders, not sure what I was going to say. And I got up there and I said, you remember what I told you last Friday? I've never loved you more, and we're going to come together as one. And so it wasn't like, for example, God, we didn't even know how DeAngelis felt until something hard happened. And how many times do we hear people say, I wish I had one more time to hold them or tell them that I love them. And I always wonder when I go to these memorial services and people get up and they deliver these great eulogies, and did people ever take the time to tell them how they felt when they were on the face of the earth? And I said, I'm never going to die. I'm never going to allow that to happen. Those kids knew how I felt. And I think that's so important. And people feel, I remember I had a mentor tell me, and I'm not sure, a mentor or leader, when I started out as principal, they said, you can't smile for the first 6 weeks. And I said, you got to be kidding me, that type of thing. And Steve, I can tell you, you can talk to people. There are people that they feel you got to lead out of fear. And I don't agree with that. I mean, I never had to tell anyone, whether it be an employee, that you're going to do it because I'm your boss. Or I never had to tell a kid you're going to do it because I'm your principal, because you lose that respect. And, you can discipline someone, but you do it with love. And I truly believe, and it sounds, love conquers all. And that's where I'm so frustrated now. And you talk a little bit about politically. I mean, you could have different views, you can agree to disagree, but gosh, I wish we wouldn't stop listening to each other, because we need to come together more now than ever. And it's people like you that allow it to happen.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, Frank. And it is people like you that have made it happen and continue to make it happen every day. Your story is such an inspiration, and your example is such an inspiration. I really hope that folks listening to this podcast will reach out to you, because they'll receive a great gift of friendship in return. So, I encourage people to read your book. They call me Mr. D. But also, how should people reach out? What's the best way to get in touch with you? So, for example, if I want you to come in and speak to my students, or speak to my school or my community, or any of the above.
Yeah, I have a Twitter account. It's Frank and Diane 72. That's my high school sweetheart. We reconnected after the tragedy, and that's my Twitter account. Or my email account is my name, #1 @yahoo.com. And I would love to do it and reach out. And it's my passion. And one of the things that there were so many lessons to be learned, and I just feel if I got an opportunity to help others, that's what I want to do. And each day I wake up, before my feet hit the ground, I recite the names of my 13, beloved 13, and they inspire me to do that. And I'll share one last story with you. One of the things that I did is, every year that one of the kids who lost their lives was supposed to graduate, I would invite their parents to my office, and I would give them a cap and gown and a diploma. And, some parents said, Frank, we appreciate it, but we just don't feel the need for that right now. Well, one family, Kyle Velasquez's mom and dad, came to my office, and all of a sudden they walk in and they're crying and I'm crying. They said, Frank, let's cry because we lost him, but smile because we had him. And we just shared wonderful Kyle stories, and I present them with a cap and gown and diploma for Kyle. And all of a sudden they're getting ready to leave. And Mr. Velasquez comes back, and he had a baseball cap on, and he takes his hat off, and he said, Mr. D, I see you have a little space on your wall. And I had a wall called the Wall of 99, and it really offered inspiration to me. And people said, how can you look at that every day and continue to be in this building? I said, that's the reason I keep coming back, is doing it in memory of the 13. And so all of a sudden he said, there's a little space there, and I want you to take Kyle's hat. I said, I can't take his hat. He said, no, you need to take it. And every day I want you to put it right there. And every day you walk out of there, Phyllis and I want you to know how much you love your kids and how much they love you. And you never give up hope. And know Kyle's going to be with you, even though not physically, spiritually, and he's going to help you get through it. And it's stuff like that that inspired me to continue to do what I'm doing.
That's beautiful. You said you start your day with reciting the names of the 13. So I would like, if you wouldn't mind, if we could end this podcast, if you would do that for us.
Sure.
Recite the names of the 13, and we'll sign off after that.
Fantastic. Cassie Bernal, Stephen Kernell, Corey DePuter, Kelly Fleming, Matt Kechter, Danny Mauser, Danny Rohrbaugh, Dave Sanders, Rachel Scott, Isaiah Scholes, John Tomlin, Lauren Townsend, Kyle Velasquez. A time to remember and a time to hope. And what I want to do is offer one last challenge as we leave. Do 13 acts of kindness where you could make a difference in this world, never giving up hope. And when you do that, remember the 13 that I just read, because you could make the world a better place just as they did for us. Thanks, Steve.
Beautiful. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Love is Just Damn Good Business with Steve Farber. Join us again next time, because when customer and employee satisfaction just isn't enough anymore, we are here to back you up with specific ideas to operationalize love to make an enormous difference in your business, personal life, and the world around you. Visit our website at stevefarber.com to leave a review. And don't forget to share the love with your colleagues and friends, because after all, it's just damn good business.